Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm just trying to show you the slides. I have 10 slides, which might indicate 20 minutes, but I have 10 minutes to talk, which means I would leave some of the slides for the reading of the audience later on, given that they contain what I consider to be very valuable quotes from documents issued by the International Energy Agency, by the International Renewable Energy Agency, by the Council of European Energy Regulators. I have noticed that more and more flexibility becomes a national challenge, but also similar problems are to be experienced in many countries which are affected by the energy transition. And as Sorin has already opened the discussion about the Ds, decarbonation, decentralization, digitalization, disruption, democratization of technology, somebody mentioned diversification, and so on. We see that most of them, or if not all, imply or impact flexibility, which becomes the new fashionable keyword. If we're trying to quote some definitions, we see that the IEA tried to define it as the ability of a power system to reliably and cost-effectively manage the variability and uncertainty of demand and supply across all relevant timescales. And we also noticed that Irina tried to bring it closer to the introduction of variable renewable energy generation, which practically generates a lot of variability and generates the need to avoid curtailment in order to keep decarbonization objectives alive. And when discussing about planning flexibility, I have highlighted here, I have bolded two very important conclusions. One, it makes much more economic sense to plan ahead for flexibility rather than exploring suboptimal investment after flexibility issues arise in a power system. Secondly, project development time, in particular permitting and construction times, have to be accounted for in the selection of solutions. And I would immediately jump to a very concrete case. Back in 2013, when we had 30,000 megawatts studied for new renewable energy projects, 20,000 megawatts in grid connection endorsements, and 10,000 megawatts in signed grid connection contracts, Transelectrica started to study how much installed capacity in wind power plants it can host. And at that time, it calculated historically how much fast tertiary reserve was available, and they said we can host 3,000 megawatts. I recently found out the same calculation performed for 2019 by the same Transelectrica. And now we see that there are 2,923 megawatts which can be hosted at this moment in the Romanian power system, with the ability to be taken over more than 90% of the time. And already Romania has something like 3,023 megawatts installed. And additionally, there is a discussion for another 2,300 megawatts to be installed in wind, and another 3,700 megawatts to be installed in solar, only if we take the figures from the National Action Plan Energy Climate Change, which at a certain moment might show other topics like some projects which might be delayed. So once again, now we call it manual frequency regulation reserve, manually activated frequency regulation reserve, but the problem is the same. Where is the flexibility? So the next slide already shows that the prices on the balancing market tend to grow. I apologize, it seems the one of the basic laws of universe is Murphy's Law. So I would try to restate the fact that Romania has one of the largest shares of energy transacted in the balancing market in Europe. And this leads to a strong influence in the balancing market prices and unbalanced costs, which practically affects the variability adjusted levelized cost of electricity. Another important statement is that practically Romania seems to be condemned to decentralization. Remember another D from the first slide. There are few projects at this moment with the final investment decision formulated in terms of large centralized projects, eventually fossil fuel fired and so on. And lessons learned in Romania show that it may take at least 6 years to commission such a new project, while meanwhile we will have to close down other providers of flexibility like coal-fired power generation units. We see more and more industrial customers installing their own solar PV installations, practically avoiding payment of transmission and distribution fees. We see large power plants planning to apply for structural funds to do renewable power generation. We see existing utility companies, and we just heard an example, planning new renewable energy sources generation and sector coupling in order to secure the power for their retail customers or for other uses. We see the National Energy Climate Plan with 3,700 megawatts in solar and 2,300 megawatts in wind at least. But all this requires flexibility. And the big question is who invests in flexibility? Because flexibility has to be in place prior to the occurrence of new variable generation sources. So once again, I have taken from Irina, and I'm not going to insist now on the flexibility enablers, on the most usual solutions for ensuring power system flexibility. And I would go more to some punctual topics. Who will procure flexibility? And looking to the cooperation TSO-DSO, which becomes stricter and thorougher at this moment, we might say very roughly that the TSO might be in charge of frequency regulation, and the DSO might be more and more in charge of local voltage control. So if we look to the solutions which are available for TSOs, once again, not for TSOs to invest, except for the cross-border interconnections. The rest, distributed energy resources, storage, demand response, sector coupling, are not targets for the TSO. These are targets for third parties which have to be encouraged to invest. And additionally, the Council of European Energy Regulations started to identify tasks for the DSO to do flexibility in the terms of congestion management, load shifting, and managing power quality. And at a certain moment, the TSO and the DSO will get together, and someplace will have to make a distinction. I'm not going to read the next slide. It will remain available. This is just an excerpt for an excellent conclusions papers of CER. But once again, it refers to the DSO providing flexibility. And now we jump to the conclusions. So many people consider that the capacity remuneration mechanisms are the solution for flexibility showing up. But once again, let's look to the causality. No flexibility, the TSO will not be able to host renewable energy sources. In a country with an adequacy issue like Romania, where new flexibility providers are to be withdrawn, like the coal-fired entities, we need to commission technologies which can get online the soonest possible. And the soonest possible are renewables. And renewables are variable. And if we do not have flexibility, we cannot commission renewables. So the question is, do we have the time to build a capacity market, to look how it operates, to allow investors to trust this market and place the money and come with flexibility, and only afterwards reap the benefits of renewables? No. So the message is that we should act on securing flexibility resources now, and the solution is state aid in the form of investment aid using structural funds, modernization fund, and other types of such solutions immediately. So first flexibility and then renewables. And we need renewables as soon as possible. The next step, okay, who should provide the flexibility services? So one main question is, who will procure frequency regulation services from decentralized resources? Remember, the country is condemned to decentralization. Would the TSO ask for frequency regulation by each kilowatt generator? Or will there be at a certain moment a certain division of tasks? So practically the question is, what is the granularity for TSO procurement of frequency regulation when the power generation would be more and more decentralized? So this means that countries like ours have a very serious challenge of starting to regulate since now the procurement by the DSOs of the flexibility services, because otherwise there will be no investment. And once again, the Council of European Energy Regulation thought about it, started to discuss various approaches, and you see on this slide the mention to rules-based approach, connection agreements, network tariffs, or market-based procurement. But we need to start a regulatory dialogue since now in order to define the principle of those rules, because we are under enormous time pressure. Once again, we need renewables. We cannot do renewables without flexibility, and we cannot do flexibility without state aid and without clear rules. Thank you very much, and sorry for the interruption.